Here we are inside of Premiere Pro, about to get our new project started, and we'll do that by giving this button here on the left a click and go ahead and get the details for our project set. Now, as I do this, I'm also going to run through the general settings I typically set up for my render machine as well as for the scratch disk, just so you have it and just so you know what the optimal settings are when you're working with 360 footage. So I'll go ahead and name this file 360 Video Project. As for the location of where I'm going to save this, I'll go ahead and save this on my desktop. So I'll just create a new desktop folder and I'll select it and hit choose. For the video rendering and playback, obviously the optimal setting would be Metal, and that's for the Mercury playback engine that runs on the Metal acceleration. However, this is all dependent on your graphics card. So if you're not able to use Metal or don't see it in your options, the second best option is the OpenCL. And of course, if you don't see either of those, you can always use the software only option. And if that's your current situation right now, no worries, because I do have a couple of tips for working with lower quality footage as we move forward in this project. So choose your best rendering playback option, and I'll go with Metal. Now I'll come up to the scratch disk here, and this is something I always like to point out because everyone has their own way of doing this, but coming from a professional background, I typically like to follow the standards. And those standards are essentially to set the locations of your system separate from your video footage, separate from your archives or autosave projects. And this is just done for redundancy and for safety, and so you don't bog down your system. So for example, the capture video and the capture audio options here, I would typically set that for either my desktop with the folder I just created, or I would do it on a separate hard drive. And in this particular project that we're putting together, we actually aren't going to be capturing video footage, so this doesn't really matter. But just for the sake of tradition, I will set this as same as project. And I'll do the same thing for the audio as well. Now I'm going to come down to the project autosave, and this is where I think the most important option comes in, only because I've been burned in the past. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this and I'm going to browse this archive drive that I have plugged into my computer here, and I will even create a folder called 360 Video Project Backup. That way, if worse comes to worse and my computer and my video drive were to crash, I would at least have backup copies on this archive drive that I could recover. So I'll go ahead and choose that option. And finally, for the ingest settings, I won't actually touch these just yet, only because we have to talk about a few other things before we get into those details. All right, with all those settings good to go, the name, the location, setting the scratch disk, and the general options, I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. And here we are. So we have a fresh new project inside of Premiere Pro, and we're still not done setting up, because the first thing we wanna do once I get in here is come up to the Premiere Pro menu bar, go to Preferences, and I'm gonna set up the media cache. So if you've never actually dealt with your media cache files before, I would highly advise doing the following. I'm going to come up here to the media cache files option, and I'm going to check this box here that says save media cache files next to originals when possible. What that means is that Premiere Pro will look at where I am saving my project, which is currently on my desktop, and it's going to gather those files together, the cache files next to my project files. And this is good because if I decided tomorrow that I needed to take this project to a separate workstation or a separate computer, I could easily load the folder onto a hard drive and then head over to that workstation without missing a beat. Media cache files, all that's good to go. And as a safety, because I like to be in control and not leave things up to chance, I'll go ahead and click this browse button here so that I can literally tell Adobe to choose that folder. We'll choose 360 Video Project folder, and I will create a new folder here, calling it Media Cache Files. And we'll hit choose. Now I'm going to come up to this option here, the Media Cache Database. You'd be surprised how many files in the cache can bog down your system over time. So definitely make sure to push this. This will clean out the unused. And now I'm going to head over to the left and go straight to my memory. General best rules of practice for Premiere is to have at least 4 gigs of RAM saved and ready to rock for Premiere itself. You'll notice here that I have 8 gigs of RAM installed in my computer, and 2 of those gigs are reserved for browsers, emails, things of that nature, and the remaining 6 have been saved for Premiere. And just as a footnote, if I did want to change this, I would simply click on the RAM reserved for other applications. I would change that number. I'll change it to 3, and that would change it down below to 5 gigs instead of 6. But I prefer 6, so I'll change that back to 2. And coming down to the optimized render, always stick with the performance option from this dropdown. It just works better. All right, that should do it for our preferences. That should do it for optimizing everything we need to get started with 360 video. So let's click OK. And just to verify that everything's worked out, I'm going to go ahead and double click on my project folder here. And there I see the media cache file has been set up. And inside this media cache file, Adobe Premiere has now begun to create the cache files and the peak files inside that folder. And if I go to my archive drive, I'll notice too that I have that folder set up and we're good to go. So let's move on and get this 360 show on the road.